What's going on, running fans, jumping fans, throwing fans, all around athletics fans? Welcome to the Talking in Ovals podcast on this Monday, March 27th of 2023. I'm Alex Cuesta, my partner in crime, Dave Hyatt, over there as well. What's going on, Dave?
Not much, just in huge anticipation of this upcoming outdoor season. After what we saw wintertime, it's going to be absolute insanity.
I still stand by that we need some elite runners trying to set world records in this interim, just like something big, because we need something to fill it. I think we're all craving it. So before we jump into the fun stuff, like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars on the show, spread this word of mouth, and go find us on the socials at Talking in Ovals. We are everywhere. So last week, Hyatt, we had a great show. Honestly, one of my favorite shows of all time that I've ever done.
Absolutely.
Julie Cully came on the show. She is a former national champion, Olympic trials champion in the 5K in 2012, Rutgers Hall of Famer, and great. So Julie was so much fun. If you haven't gone back and listened yet, she recounts that 5K race at the 2012 trials, and it's just, you're there with her. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, her story could be a documentary. So I'm excited for that. Go back and listen to that. This week, though, Hyatt, we have another fantastic guest, and I am anticipating this show. You know, it's going to be a high bar to set, but I'm anticipating this show being just as good. He is Jeff Benjamin. He's an American track and field writer for almost 4 decades, senior writer at RunBlogRun, and he has a whole list of accolades. He's the former president of Staten Island AC and chair of the Staten Island Running Association. He, he's a member of the College of Staten Island Sports Hall of Fame for cross country, and he currently serves as the LDR chairman at USATF New York. Jeff, what's going on, man?
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to see you guys, Alex and Dave. You give me a tough bar to follow. I got to follow Julie Cully, man. that is no easy feat. So I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Julie's tough as nails. That's what we found out about her. She doesn't give up. But you know what? I have to say, following a sport that does not get a ton of press, that does not get a ton of celebrity, and continuing to write about it, be passionate, be positive, that takes a lot of toughness and tenacity too on your own, Jeff. Like, there's very few people that want to engage in track and field at the level that you have without, there's not much glitz and glamour in track and field unless you're big time Olympian, Usain Bolt, things like that. So I appreciate you coming on. I think you've done a lot of good legwork and kept this sport and laid the foundation for guys like Dave and I to be able to do something like this for Citius Magazine, for Flow Track, because, you just kept going, and a lot of us have found inspiration through guys like you. So I want to start right away. You are also a runner. You're not just a guy that writes about running. You still look like you could probably run a marathon. What was the time when you first started running when you were young that you kind of got the spark to be a runner?
All right. No, I appreciate it. Back in 1981, I got into running. I was a Susan Wagner High School student here, and there was just a social studies teacher running on the track. I joined him, and it kind of went from there. Basically, I was very beginner. I mean, basically 8 minutes a mile, 4-mile stuff, 5-mile stuff. My first race I ever entered, a 5-mile race put on by the New York Roadrunners on Staten Island. I actually ran neck and neck with, of all people, Fred LeBeau, and we both broke 40 minutes. But I have to tell you, Fred put a step in front of me and beat me. So, and you can look at the records. The records don't lie. But I was fortunate enough as a young guy to be around, like you said, inspiring people kind of setting the bar. And the person who was my guy was Art Hall. Art Hall was a top 5 finisher in the early New York City marathons, an African-American distance runner at a time when African-Americans were stereotyped as jumpers and sprinters. Mm-hmm. And he was a protege of Ted Corbett, the legendary Ted Corbett. And Art was very inclusive, welcomed everybody onto his North Shore Track Club of all abilities, didn't care who you were. His mantra was always like, I really don't care if you're a good runner, I want a good person here. And from there, Art guided me. Art showed us the commitment and the way. And, Art was a sub 25-minute 5-mile guy here in the New York metropolitan area. He took on runners like Lou Vasquez, who's still around, Lou runs Randall's Island, and other people. And Art was known kind of like Steve Prefontaine. He always took it out from the beginning. So if you see some real top-of-the-line road races in the New York area in the late 70s, early 80s, some photos, you'll see him on the line with guys like Eamon Coughlin, Diet Pepsi 10K, no longer run, which started on the George Washington Bridge. He was always ready there to do battle. And one year in one of the early marathons, he beat the up-and-coming Bill Rogers, who was just developing at that time. And the great story with that was that Bill was having a tough day. The course was still 5 laps of Central Park in 1974. It was very hot. Art passes Bill. Bill had been passed out on the ground, and Art got him up, finished the race, which does sound very inspiring, and Bill never forgot it. But I would always say, Jeff, it was 1974 and up in Manhattan. He's a white guy on the grass. He had to get up and get out of here. It was a combination of stuff. And Art was totally inspirational. And one of the great things is that the New York Roadrunners inducted him into their Hall of Fame this past fall.
Nice.
Which is great. Perfect. Yeah, so he's up there with a lot of those big names, which is really wonderful. So, but I then joined my Susan Wagner team. And in 1982, we won the New York City Cross Country Championships. And kind of like that movie McFarlane, I was the 5th man. So whenever I get together with these guys, I get free dinner. So
yeah, and that's the thing about XC that people don't realize. If you're not involved in cross country, you can have a great top 3. You're only as good as your 5th man. Like you're only as good as that pack number. Yeah, it really is.
yeah. So quite a few of those guys on my team are still involved in the sport. And then I stayed local, College of Staten Island, ran there, and really never lost a love for it. One thing that Art did for us. In 1982, there was a race called the Trevera Twosome. You ran with a partner, and it was a 10-mile race in Central Park. And I was 17 years old, and he told me, he said, hey, try your best to break an hour today. And I did. I ran like 58:40, which for me is fantastic. But when the race was over, Art brought me over and introduced me to the guy who won the race, and it was Matt Centrowitz Sr.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I was introduced to Frank Shorter, and then I was introduced to Jeff Smith. And all these guys are going, hey, let's go do a cool down. And I got kind of excited. I went with them, but I only lasted about 5 minutes. They really weren't going that fast. I was just dead, But from that moment, I mean, one thing, you had mentioned about the sport, the inspiration, the inclusivity of it. You can meet elite world-class athletes. Most of them are very open and very friendly, going from way back when. I started the writing stuff in 1989. It was Fred who got me my first press credential. And then I met Larry Eder, who was the publisher at the time of a magazine called American Athletics, which has now evolved into RunBlogRun. And Larry does a morning thing on Facebook every morning called Coffee with Larry. It's kind of like a video solo podcast of 30 minutes where he gives praise, but also laments about the sport and his own opinions and stuff, and they're really cool. And Larry always had that passion as well. So, Larry passed on a lot of stuff to us. But, like you said, the people before us really set the standard. Even meeting Bill Rogers, who's a great pal of mine, it's just inspiring.
I mean, that you have so many great experiences just right there. I want you to kind of now walk me down memory lane a little bit. What have been some of your favorite memories, like going the Wayback Machine, starting off as a runner, obviously winning the New York State Cross Country Championships has to be there, but what are some other memories that you had, even if it's like the smallest one, like I was at a dual meet and I hit a PR, like something that sticks in your head, a few memories that just stick with you?
Right. On Staten Island every year since 1948, we have a Thanksgiving Day race that is named for the beneficiary fellow, Lou Marley, a pharmacist who sponsored the race. It is old school. You just show up and run. There's no entry fee.
Nice.
People just run. The running boom of the 70s and 80s brought out hundreds of really good local runners, mostly from Staten Island. And in the 1980s, Bob Andrews, Robbie's father, won the race twice. I believe he ran 14:14 for 3 miles. And they've always had a loaded field. In the mid-90s, I was always running. I was never the level of that. I was running about 15:30 for 3 miles. And that's good to me. I'm very happy with it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No, thank you. And my coach at that time was the 2-time winner of the New York City Marathon, Tom Fleming.
Oh, wow.
And I would drive out to Jersey sometimes and train out in Bloomfield and see runners like Joe LeMay and Anne-Marie Letko do their work. And like I said, totally inspiring and unbelievably inclusive people. And in 1994, Tom put me on a year plan to run 15 minutes, 20 seconds for the Lou Marley run. And that day I ran 15:21 and I won the race. But I'm also aware the time that I ran with in 1995 is good, but in 1984 I would have been dusted. It's just, and you guys probably see this all over the country. The running boom has transformed itself. You still get a lot of people running, but the quality of finishes definitely is not what it once was. I am not somebody who likes to look back at the good old days. I think everything is relative to the time, but you cannot dispute the fact that somebody could run 17 minutes today at a 5K in New York or New Jersey and win the race.
Yeah.
You know, it just is what it is.
Definitely on the road racing side. Absolutely. I think it's a little different when you get on the actual track. I thought this winter track was just, crazy with how many times and fast, but definitely road running side seems to, I don't know if it's taken an actual dip, but it's definitely seems like, there's not as many people or more people are running more on an actual track because there's so many more tracks that are readily available at this time, but definitely.
And so, Jeff, what do you think of the fact that maybe too also there was a kind of a boom in the early 2000s and still carrying in of just people running for fitness more than anything. It became, and with the Tough Mudders and certain things like that. And just like the pride of being able to finish 13.1 miles or finish a marathon, it was less about running it fast. And it was more about, I was able to do it. Do you think that has had anything to do with the time slowing down and also the ultra marathon really becoming a big deal? There was always people that did ultras, but I feel like there's a lot more people now that kind of dive into it because I think it's a good thing, right? Because the running community is pretty strong now. There's a lot of people that enjoy running, but I think there's less people that enjoy putting yourself through the physical necessities of running fast. Do you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned necessities. That's a polite way of saying great pain, right? But the running boom, like you said, is definitely transformed. You get more participants today. Yes. But what's interesting? That a lot of the guys I was around in the 80s, it was almost like a Darwinian kind of way of training where they would run a marathon, let's say in 2:30, and then a week later they would run some 5-mile race somewhere. Yeah. And going to a trainer's room, getting cryotherapy, chiropractic, nutrition, sleep. A lot of the runners didn't get that. What's interesting is that guys like Frank Shorter for a 10-year period averaged about 160 miles a week. Okay. But he also got 14 hours of sleep. He slept 10 hours throughout the night, and then he would take a 3-4 hour nap in the afternoon. Bill Rogers was the same way. There were others who did it as well, but that commitment is interesting because, you look back, Frank Shorter was a Yale graduate who was literally, I think, living like in a trailer park in Florida, training to become Olympic champion. You know, Bill Rogers was on food stamps. Bill recently told a story about how he was so poor, him and his friend Jason, who were running, and this is before he was the Bill Rogers. It took him about 3 years to get there. Sometimes they wait for restaurants to close at night and they go through the garbage to eat, to get food out of it, and the sacrifice at that level is very, very tough to do. And especially now, if you're a sub-elite, like I said, the people run the 2:30 marathons, the 2:40, there aren't that many of them left. And like I said, I think it's a combination of things, physical. I do find that in my travels, and I saw this a lot when Tom Fleming was coaching me, people would come to Tom and say, "Oh, you won the marathon. I'd love for you to coach me." And Tom would say, "Well, listen, I got to give you a program, but it's probably not going to reach fruition for about 6 to 7 months, developing progressive." And a lot of those people wouldn't deal with it. They'd rather just jump into the speed work or jump into the hard stuff, and I'm an old Arthur Lydiard, Rod Dixon kind of guy. And Rod's my big older brother, if you've seen my Facebook page. We've been very close for many years. And, you hear stories from Rod about how, on a Sunday morning, he, John Walker, Dick Quacks would join a club, like in New Zealand, they were with, and some of them were recreational runners. And the first hour would be like 8 minutes a mile. But then the recs would all turn around, and then they would pick it up to another turnaround and come back, and then they'd be running like 6:30 pace. Yeah. Even Shorter said on his long runs on Sundays, he basically just went as he felt. He wasn't even sure how far how fast he was going, but he always felt that the last few miles of that, he was putting a little zip in it. I like going up to like 85%. And it's funny, like the simple mantra, which I learned from Seb Coe, where Seb told us one time, he goes, because everybody always asks, hey, what's the perfect training program? Hey, what's the perfect method? And I always feel Seb's idea is training is progressive. If you're not making progress after a week or two, you have to assess the training, and you can get to the top different ways,
So, Jeff, you've been around the sport for a long time. We talk about on this show frequently. We've had a lot of high school coaches on, pretty high level high school coaches in Jersey, talking about the differences in training and how, we've all kind of gotten that old school training, right? A lot of hammering, a lot of hard running, a lot of workouts, a lot of that type of stuff. And it certainly has gotten a different direction where I feel like there's a lot more, in a lack of a better term, sensitivity to how the athletes are feeling and molding the training in different ways. Do you see a lot of that differences going on from when you were just covering early on and seeing it now and what that has, created for the athlete?
Yeah, that I think that has been going on even before we all got into running. One of my great mentors was the legendary Joe Newton of York High School. Joe was a great man. Joe at York High School produced a dynasty team. And there's that movie, The Long Green Line, like his guys were running, if you ran 16 minutes for 3 miles on Joe Newton's team, you were on the JV. And, his team won countless Illinois state championships. But what's interesting is that only 1 or 2 of his kids in all those years went on to any kind of success at college or the world-class level. But Joe also came out with books. And you read these books, they were training. He had kids who were in shirts over the summer that said the 1,000-mile club, running 1,000 miles over the summer. Do the math. How many miles a week? Okay. But, Joe always defended it. And there are coaches today who defend it and say, listen, a lot of them aren't going to run in college anyway. I want to win. I want to make this time of their lives, just as big, just as important. At the same time, coaches are concerned about winning, without a doubt. And I said it's a tough balance. It's a tough balance to hit because, sometimes we've seen a lot of great high school runners, especially girls, who do not continue. And, and Kara Gouch's book just came out. Yep. What's interesting about Kara was not even all that great in high school. And from what I could read, her coach was a really good guy, but he didn't put her through like the shredder, so to speak. Right. And so by the time she got to CU and then beyond, she was able to excel. Yep. And that brings up a great question because the British for years used to have that club system. You ran on a club, certain meets throughout the year, nothing piled on. And this way you could develop later on. And in Britain, they argue right now, why can't we have a Peter Elliott, Seb Coe, Steve Ovett, Steve Cram right now? And, the push for immediate gratification, immediate excellence goes on in a lot of sports, especially with the youth. It's very difficult. It's a fine line to balance. Bill Bowerman used to abhor indoor season, which I found interesting. I never knew that. He was not a fan of indoor very much. And so a lot of times, whatever the NCAA requirements was, he either brought a minimal squad to indoor meets, or he didn't show up at all, or he tried to make them run in trainers. Wow. And you look at the Oregon legacy, a lot of those guys continue to run at the highest level after graduation. Yep. But it's also, listen, what's the reward? You got to really want to do it to try to get into national world-class level post-college today. Yeah. Okay. You cannot work a job. You must train. A lot of these people travel, to the high altitude areas of America for the thin air training. Mm-hmm. There's an investment. A lot of them are under shoe contracts, and shoe contracts these days are not what they once were either. But if you're a runner, you're like, well, you got to get in this other race because it's part of your contract to do a certain amount of races a year. It's very, very difficult to do. Very challenging. And that's why, by the way, I really admire the runners of today, the Emma Coburns, Matthew Centrowitz, Paul Chalimo, all these other people who run really, really at the highest level. And boy, have they sacrificed a lot to get there.
A ton.
Yeah. Do you also feel that maybe, with the infusion of technology and the internet, that so many coaches know what other coaches are doing now, and it's kind of become a little bit of like a copycat thing in a sense?
Oh, yeah. The internet, without a doubt, has been the ultimate stealing of ideas or sharing of ideas or whatever you want to call it. I have a website, which I mentioned before, Jeff Benjamin's Running World. I just launched it 2 months ago. And I put an opinionated column up in the first one, but my second one was look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's the super shoes.
Yeah. About those. And,
yep. We talked quite a bit about the shoes and how they help you with like rest, and you can train harder.
Yep. And it's the talk of the world. I'm 58. I still actually run races. And Jim Spivey, who's another great pal of mine from ASICS, recommended for me the ASICS Lightspeed. And I bought him about 2.5 years ago. I am holding my own, but I will tell you what, if I had on the training shoes of the past, I'd be a minute or two slower over 5K.
Yeah.
And the one thing that's amazing for me, I just ran a race this past Saturday on Staten Island, just under 7 minutes a mile for 5K, right? Woke up the next day, no soreness in the calves, Achilles, lower feet. Yeah. Like the recovery is just unbelievable. However, though, I will tell you, there's some new studies out that claim that a lot of the collegiate and high school runners are getting hurt, the youth runners are getting hurt, because you're only supposed to wear those shoes maybe once or twice a week, and once for maybe a high quality workout, and then for the race. And people are getting enamored with them, and they're wearing them 7 days a week. And it's leading to a lot of stress fractures, knee issues, hip issues, because they're not designed for that.
So hopefully we'll get some balance with that. Now, we had Eric Holt on a few episodes ago, and Eric was fantastic.
Great guy. Yeah.
I actually saw him break his first 4-minute mile a few years ago on the Jersey Shore.
Oh, yeah.
It was wonderful.
He came on like 2 days after he ran the 3:53, and he's like, I'm just not that happy.
I wasn't happy. I just PR'd for my life.
Must be nice,
but I wasn't happy.
That's great, in my opinion. You want somebody who's not happy with a 3:53.
Yeah, he was tremendous.
You want to sit and be satisfied. People want to be champions. They got to be like, oh, I wasn't happy with this.
Absolutely.
And I think great things are in Eric Holt's future. But
I agree 100% with you. Definitely. He's got the right coaches. He's got John Troutman, Tom Nohilly.
Yep.
They know how to progress these guys. But it comes down to this too with every athlete, because you could read those years ago. Track and Field News had those books, How They Train. Okay. Yeah. Everybody got to the top in a different way. Okay. Steve Jones, the former world record holder in the marathon in 1984, who's another great pal of mine, he never stretched. His nutrition was god awful. Okay. He maybe ran about 90 miles a week at about 6-minute pace. Okay. But he ran a 2:07 marathon. Okay. Incredible. And it was a world record holder. And his diet was god awful. I think it was like Coca-Cola, shoe fly pie, something like that. You could look it up. In the 80s, it's interesting. Like some of the diets that these guys had, and yet they were still able to run the way they did. Yep. Bill Rogers put mayonnaise on his pizza. Some people do that.
Blasphemy.
Daughtery like in a week.
Yeah.
There's definitely.
The thing is, the coaches they had, they bought into what they were selling.
Yes.
And that's half the battle.
Right. Like with Seb Coe, some of his dad coached him. His dad had no track and field background. His dad was an engineer who was a cyclist. He studied other coaches. He studied Eastern Europe training methods. He was one of the first coaches to agree to let his son do weight training 3 days a week. And Seb did heavy stuff. Okay. But sometimes there were weeks in there where Seb was only running 30 miles a week.
Which is incredible thing at Sebastian Coe and how he ran.
Yeah.
That was something that would work.
From the era before, who was a world record holder in the mile gold medals, he ran 150 miles a week.
Right.
There are many ways to get to the top, but Spivey always says it's this, the 9 inches above your neck.
Oh yeah.
You believe in your coach, amazing things can happen.
One of the things that Eric brought up that I found interesting, and I want to get your opinion on, because we were talking about, the fast times and how great it's been and things like that. And he said, he's like, there's 1,000 races now that have elite level talent. He's like, you just go shopping and you'll have 3 or 4 races at a time, all these people trying to do exactly what you're doing at around that level, where it used to be a lot less races with the lead athletes, and you would have to pick and choose your spots to go and try and get the A standard here or things like that, where now there's fast races and we see it. There's fast races going on in Boston. There's fast races going on in wherever it is. We're seeing all these fast times. So what do you think? Do you think that has a huge factor to play in why we're seeing so many more fast times, that there's so many more opportunities to do it?
Right. I actually wrote in my column this month, the fact that, first of all, the athletes of today have access to trainers, state-of-the-art stuff. I mean, you can go into a Restore Wellness store. They do the vitamin drip, which is it's just putting vitamins into your blood. It's totally illegal. Yeah. You have the Hyper Ice stuff, the massage leg things that they sell, which, by the way, I swear by it.
No more of the leg roller. I remember the painful leg roller we taught to go through.
Yeah, right. Back in the day, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's the cryotherapy.
For the calf stretcher.
Oh, yeah. I still love that thing.
It still works. You go with it.
Oh, yeah.
But what's interesting? The other thing I did bring up, COVID was a big factor to 2 ways. Number one, a lot of athletes lost a year of eligibility, but the colleges waived it. Mm-hmm. So you do have some older college athletes now, 23, 24. They're not in the world of work. They're still competing. And you know what? A guy's body, a girl's body from 20 years old to 23, 24, totally different animal. Yep. The other thing is with the COVID, races were canceled for a good 8 to 9 months. Mm-hmm. I feel that a lot of these athletes got their endurance base stronger by doing it without racing all the time and tearing that apart. So they are stronger. They are stronger. But I also feel the hardest thing to become a really great distance runner, if you sit down an athlete and are like, all right, we're going to build you up with a 3-month period of just building blocks. A lot of people don't want to do that.
Especially elite level athletes, asking them to be patient. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and it's funny, Jim Spivey was a 349 miler numerous times. Yeah. And he recently told me, he said, he was only running like 35, 40 miles a week. And he was at Indiana when he made the 84 Olympic team with the great Sam Bell. But then he noticed, and he graduated but stayed with Coach Bell. But Coach Bell's priority was the college athletes. So he was peaking them in May. But if you want to be a top American athlete, you got to peak in June for the trials or whatever, July
August.
And you want to make your money, you got to go to Europe and make the money in the summertime.
Yeah.
And so Spivey found he was peaking a little bit, but it wasn't like going on. And he said, my hardest decision was to tell this coach who I loved I had to find new coaches. And he fell in with a guy, Mike Durkin, a 76-80 Olympian, and Ken Popejoy, a top masters runner later on in sub-4-minute miler. And Jim is like 29 years old. He's been running for 12, 13 years already. And they're like, all right, go out for a 90-minute run today. He said, I never ran 90 minutes in my life. But he found that built his endurance and everything. And he fell into it. He was still able to keep his 349. Eventually got his 5K time down to like 13:15.
Which is great.
Which is pretty good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing with the shoes, going back to the shoes, I kind of look at it as like the baseball thing. There was a New York Post baseball writer and later covered track, Maury Allen. Might be before you guys' time. But he was a great, insightful writer. And he wrote a book in the 80s called Baseball's 100, the greatest baseball players who ever lived. Number 1 for him was Willie Mays. Number 2 for him was Henry Aaron. Number 3 was Babe Ruth. And when he wrote about Babe Ruth, he said, Babe Ruth played in an era where the quality of the stuff was not as good. Babe Ruth did not play a day game after a night game. They didn't do that back then. Babe Ruth did not face specialized relief pitchers. Yep. Back then, the relief pitchers were these guys you just threw in the game. He said, Babe Ruth was great. He said, but Mays and Aaron did it under more difficult, issues. And Aaron, especially when he chased Babe Ruth's record and was hit with the hate mail, the racist hate mail.
Babe Ruth only played against other white players too. It was not an integrated game. So that's some of the best talent.
So that era with Goose Gossage, if you ever follow him on media, he's like, oh man, if I pitched today, I'd be thrown out of the game, but I would still get all these guys out. And it was a lot of today. They just made the base bigger. And Dusty Baker said, if Ricky Henderson played today,
200 stolen bases,
100 steals, he'd have 2,000 career steals.
Yeah.
And it brings up really good arguments, in a bar, restaurant, among people, like the shoes today, yeah, without a doubt, they're a difference. But you know what? That's the trend. That's what's going on. You know, and some people say, oh my God, the price of these shoes, they're so expensive. You go to a race in Central Park, man, you're going to see everybody on the line with these $250 shoes.
And it's also all relative, right? Because the going trend has always been, I remember when I was in high school, it was all about the Nike Frees. The Nike Frees were great trainers. I loved them. And then you had the Nike Zoom Milers, which were, if you're a middle distance guy, you had to have both. I had my parents spending $300 off of 2 shoes, not knowing if I was going to be truly any good because they got it for me freshman year. So it was like, you know, it's always a thing and it's always relative, right? Because the $250 shoes now would have been $160 back then. It's
right.
not
money is definitely relative. But you know what? With these great, and I always like to say constructive arguments, I hope nobody ever gets personal about them.
No, you can't.
You know, but the fact is that I think that if you study the history of our sport, with everything, you appreciate those athletes from the previous eras.
Roger Bannister on those cinder tracks. My God.
Yep. Yeah. Peter Snell on a grass track running 144 for the 800. Ridiculous. You know, you really appreciate, you know, how great those people were. And if Jim Spivey ran today, he'd probably run 346. But Jim said, but Seb would be running 343.
But you never know, though. You never know because would they have gotten hurt with our certain training? Would we have pushed him to do certain things? Because we are very much fad people. There isn't you know, Hyatt brings up all the time. Coaches used to coach for themselves. They kind of hated each other. You know, they would grunt at each other and go by. How's it going? And that was the end of it. You coached your own athletes. There was none of this sharing. And Dave likes to bring up, and I always think it's a great point, especially for indoor. You're running on all these bank tracks.
Yes.
There is no more Milrose wood tracks. There is no more gym floor tracks or things like that, or tennis courts. Like, you're running on all these beautiful Mondo padded, you know,
bank tracks,
well kept bank tracks. And some of them even can adjust for the freaking race. So it is ridiculous what you can do right now.
Yeah, but like I said, I think it's still great. And on Staten Island, we have that Ocean Breeze indoor facility.
Wonderful.
Ocean Breeze is great. Heaven with that. That's like awesome sight. You know,
I was going to talk about that a little bit later about, you know, like what has that meant to the community?
It's totally used. I mean, the one thing that's interesting is Lou Vasquez, Lauren Primerano run the facility. Lauren.
I want Lauren. I was in contact with Lauren to come on. She hasn't gotten back to me. I'm going to be mad. I want Lauren to come on. She's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Lauren is actually a former Olympic trials javelin thrower from Manhattan. Yep. And she, you know, the one thing that's great about Ocean Breeze, and as track people, you'd appreciate this, the meets always end either according to schedule or early.
They do.
It's like the Penn relays almost. Like it ends when it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, I was coaching a little at Marist while Dan Mecca was still running a lot of those meets while doing his double duty with Manhattan coaching.
Right.
And one thing I always knew about Dan, you know, Dan was an on-time guy. Coach Mecca was an on-time guy. So I've always knew those meets were running on time.
Right. But you guys know from our time, like going through the horrors of like, your race is going off at 4:00. Now it's not going off at 8, you know? And it's funny you brought up the Armory. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe I was in the last race ever in the Armory. It was a mile race in, I think, December of 85 or January 86. And it literally went off at like 11 o'clock at night because it was delayed. And the homeless were actually sleeping on their beds in the middle while we ran this mile.
I mean,
that's what we did back then, you know?
There was no
but I'm not going to begrudge the younger generation. You know what? You take whatever legal advantages you could do. You know, on the subject of the PEDs and all that, it always disappoints me. And, you know, I am a true fan. And Seb Coe has told me I'm a very bad writer, jokingly. He says, because all you write about is the good stuff. And I tend to shy away from the controversy and all that. You know, I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff. And it's really terrible and it really stinks. And you know what, if you're going to do what's that line? If you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. Hey, listen.
We just saw New Zealand Zane Robertson, I believe. You know, his lie, you know, about how he did it.
Yep.
And Rod Dixon once again went on an interview where like he is beyond disgusted because he feels it also hurts New Zealand athletics, not just the individual.
Yeah, I mean, everyone. from there now is going to be asked that question. You're Christian Warholms and all them, and even if they don't do anything wrong, it's like what's happening in Kenya. You know,
right.
Like they're just going to kind of accuse everyone, even if they're not doing anything.
And you can look at Russia. Like, I get it. Russia's persona non grata right now for what's going on with the war, correct? But even before this, in the world of track and field, the WADA report really just was terrible. And the fact that not many people really read the WADA report, right? All we know is Russian athletes cheated and bad. If you read the WADA report, though, you have a little bit of sympathy for them, because if you were an elite athlete in Russia, there wasn't a choice. The Athletics Federation came to you and said, this is what you're doing. This is who you're being coached by. You do what you're told. You win glory for Russia. So it's like, right now, there's still, a lot of times their banners weren't, and it's not new because of the war. A lot of times Russia had to run on the Olympic flag banner anyway, because they were banned for a lot of things. So, I feel with all this stuff, it does really reflect badly on all the athletes, which kind of sucks, because in all these countries, there's a lot of athletes that are just trying to go and trying to work as hard as they can to bring success and glory to themselves. And
it's funny you bring it up, because even East Germans years ago, now it's a police state. And for anybody who's listening, the reason that the Russian athletes are really banned is because it was evidence, like you said, this was a government-sponsored program.
Yeah.
You wanted to compete in track and field, and you were Russian. You had to do the drugs.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's not like, if we bust somebody in New Zealand like Zane Robertson, who was in Kenya, right? It doesn't mean that New Zealand athletics has a government-run program for this stuff. So, tell you what, for Seb Coe and World Athletics, it definitely was not an easy decision for them to do, but they're sticking with it. And
there has to be tough rules
at this point.
There has to be tough rules. The rules have to be enforced, because there is a stain on the sport that we find so many times. Like, Marion Jones still hurts to this day. I love, Marion Jones is fantastic. I enjoyed watching her so much. And to find out about her, and me being a younger, I think I was in middle school at the time when Marion Jones was really doing her thing. Yeah. That was inspiring. She was kicking ass. And then you have, what was it called? Tyson Gay was another one that, and, Christian Coleman recently. Justin Gatlin. Yeah. So it's like, it's tough to see this going on. Now, one of the things I've noticed too, America, I don't know how it is around the world. It seems like to us, we're a little bit of Teflon though, because we do have these sprinters that do it, but we're still considered like the top sprinting nation in the world, outside of basically competing with Jamaica. So around the world, do we kind of have a reputation? Like, you've been doing more of that. Do we have a little bit of a reputation outside of the world of the country that you always suspect them of that, since we have that?
The world that we're in, if somebody runs a remarkable performance, there's going to be somebody out there who's going to say, are they doing it?
Yeah.
Are they doing the drugs? And whether it's American, Jamaican, or any other country, that's always the big issue. It is burdensome, because it's like you mentioned, Marion Jones. I mean, I've met Marion. I knew Marion during that time. Wonderful. You'd see kids run to her after the Milrose games and stuff, and the one thing that's very, very difficult, almost every one of these athletes takes every selfie and signs every autograph.
Yep.
They never turn down anybody. And, and then you find out these other things that happened, it's just really, really crazy. Really, really crazy. But, you take that stuff, you could have, success and fame. You always have to fear about getting caught. But I do believe you're taking years off your life. The science does not dispute that. You do not have a very good quality of life over the age of 55 or 60.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm aware of some athletes, even at the sub-elite level, others that I see now who are older than me. Some are healthy, others are not. Some have very dramatic issues, like a tumor the size of a grapefruit growing out of their kidney.
Jesus.
And you'd hate to think it, but it does make you wonder, what did they do?
I'm happy currently that kind of like right now, Sydney McLaughlin and Femke Bol are both seem to be above it. They both seem to be people that I haven't heard anyone suspect either of them. I think Mo's another one. I always thought it was ridiculous when people suspected Usain Bolt, because Usain Bolt has been a string bean since you even saw him in high school. The guy has not changed. He looks like an 800-meter runner, like he always has. So I always thought it was dumb that he was suspected. So I want to switch a little gears here, Jeff. I want to get into some of your favorites in your career.
Oh, sure.
Who have been some of the favorite people that you have gotten to interview for your writing and some of the things that you've done.
Right. If it's okay, I want to mention two things I witnessed.
Yeah, absolutely.
That have been unbelievable. In 1992, Jim Spivey won the Olympic trials in the 1500. Mm-hmm. And knowing Jim during that time, I said Jim was a 349 miler. He was almost a favorite for an Olympic medal in 88. And at the 88 trials, in a tactically slow race on the Indiana track that he ran on, he was outkicked for the third spot by Mark Deedy, an Indiana teammate. And so Spivey did not go to the Seoul Olympics.
Wow.
At the end of the year, though, he ran, I believe, a 3:31 1500. So he's peaking for that. And he ran that anyway.
Yeah.
And it's one of those if, coulda, woulda, shoulda. The following year, Nike dropped his contract, and nobody wanted him. And he basically, got a deal with ASICS, but it was mostly equipment with performance bonuses. And Jim put a lot of stuff, him and his wife, Jim's parents, financially. Yeah. He was like, I really want to try to make the team in 92. And they built up to that. Now in 91, we had the USA Nationals at Randall's Island, top 3 go to the Tokyo World Championships. Jim finished 4th again.
Ah, geez.
Tactical race. And I was with him quite a bit in 92. I visited the Glen Ellen, Chicago area where Joe Newton was as well. And did a little running with Jim, like I said, a very, slow pace for him from time, because his recovery runs were recovery. And we go to the game, we go to the trials in 92 in New Orleans. It's a hot day. He makes the final. And we have a Staten Island great runner in the race, Charlie Marsala, who was known for an unbelievably deadly kick. And Terrence Harrington, who had a great kick. And Steve Holman had just come off an NCAA championship at Georgetown.
Holman was good.
Victory. And Spivey's game plan, which I did not know before the race, because when we saw it, I was like really nervous. With 2 laps to go, he threw in a 56-second 400. Okay? And his video of it, go on YouTube. And he strings it out. And then he runs 54 for his last 400 and wins the race. That was highly emotional for all of us. It was really great redemption for him, to make the team and, try to go for the gold. And in the gold medal race, he was primed to run his last. He said he goes off of any pace. I believe I could run my last quarter in 52:51 seconds, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
In the final, though, Fermín Cacho of Spain runs either a 50 point or 49.9. No one knows exactly. He won the race, and Jim finished 6th. But Jim would then go on to make another Olympic team in 96 for Atlanta, to run in your home country and all that stuff. So that was very rewarding. The other thing that was very rewarding for me, for my 50th birthday present, my lifelong friend, Tony Galata, a running fanatic like I am, took me to Rio for the Olympic Games.
Nice.
Where I met everybody. You meet everybody in track and field. It's very easy to do. Watching Matthew Centrowitz win the gold medal.
Yep.
And you mentioned tactical races, the king of tactics. He has to be one of the most tactical racers of all time. Yeah.
Slow as heck, and he was in the front.
Yep.
And you figure everyone else is, using their, conserving their energy. And there's something up on YouTube. I had a video of it, like an unauthorized version on YouTube of the race from the back stretch. But to watch Matthew cross that line and win it, no American had won the Olympic gold medal in the 1500 since 1908. Mm-hmm. Staten Island had a guy years ago, Abel Kiviat, who we got to know in 1991. He died at the age of 99. He was America's oldest living Olympian. Wow. A Jewish guy who was captain of the Irish American Athletic Club, because that club did not care who you were. And Abel broke the world record for 1500 3 times over 16 days in May and June of 1912, making the Olympic team. His roommate to the Stockholm Olympics was Jim Thorpe, because they put the Jewish guy with the Native American guy in the steerage. Welcome to 1912 America, right?
Yeah.
And Kiviat was the favorite for the gold medal, and in one of the greatest races ever run, he's leading, and at the last 20 yards, Arnold Jackson of Great Britain literally jumps by him and wins the race. And Kiviat they were so close, first, second, and third, that it was the first time they ever used the photo finish technology to determine who got the medals.
Wow. And
Kiviat will later go on to get a gold medal in the race isn't run anymore, a 3,000 meter team relay. And he got a gold medal in that. But for years, if you look online, Abel Kiviat, sometimes you pick some old articles, he'll say, sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night, sweating all those years later, feeling Jackson come by me to take the gold.
That has to be tough.
Great story.
Yeah, he was right there. He was right there. And listen, he was a good character about it later on and everything. He balanced it, with his other accomplishments. He won a lot of Milrose games in that era, set a lot of world records, and his range, he won the 6-mile United States cross-country championship at Van Cortlandt, during that time.
That's incredible. And that was Van Cortlandt when Van Cortlandt was Van Cortlandt.
Right. And you'll get a kick out of this because of the theme of the show. I found a little piece in Sports Illustrated I posted on my Facebook page a while back where a reporter in 1958 asked Abel Kiviat, who was about 60 years old at that time, he goes, what's the difference between the athletes of 1912 and 1958 or whatever? And you know what he said? He goes, oh, the shoes are better.
Yep.
The tracks are better.
Yeah.
And
Same thing we're saying now.
He goes, they have better coaching and conditioning. He said, we only ran like 3 days a week. These guys now do it all the time. So, every generation is going to have this.
It's all relative.
Rubber band arguments, as I call them. But to see Matthew win it, and I know what that meant to his dad as well. His dad was a 76 Olympian who was new to the game, so he wasn't really expected to do much. And like Bill Rogers, Craig Virgin, and these great runners, they did not run in the 80 Olympics because of the boycott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had on Julie Cully last week, and before she went to Gagliano, she was actually coached by the Matt Senchowicz Senior, so she was talking. About him, and it was pretty neat. So I wanted to ask you, for covering the sport for over 40 years, how has the transition gone from print to online? Like, how much of a change was that for you? And did you find that it was difficult, or did you just kind of know that you had to adapt as everything was changing?
Well, I went with the flow. I try to be as an adaptive creature as I can. And I pretty much, like I said, I've always been with Larry Eder. So, I think it was 2008, Larry Eder went totally online with RunBlogRun. He stopped printing the magazine, I think around 2011, 2012. And, it's just, as I like to say, it's the way of the world. But what's interesting? When I first started as a writer, like in 89, 90, 91, indoor season in New York City was very special. Unfortunately, we did not know it, but it was coming to an end. You had the Milrose games. You had a meet in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, the Vitalis meet, with a wooden track that was designed by Eamon Coughlin.
Yep. Where
Eamon did run the 3:49 world record mile on the wooden boards. Crazy. He designed the track, which was just as rewarding.
Yeah.
The USA Indoor Nationals was always in Madison Square Garden, always.
Yep.
And down in Fairfax, Virginia, George Mason University hosted the Mobile Invitational.
Yep.
So like a common thing would be like guys would run Milrose on Friday, drive down there, compete Sunday, and they would all still be in the New York area for a good 3 weeks, including the legends that will come here from all over the world. Guys like Saeed Alwida, Nordine Morsali, who ran indoors here.
Yeah, those names. Wow.
All these great athletes were here. Sergei Bubka. So, in that era, when the newspaper was still like the daily thing that people read, I think it was a little bit easier for the writers, especially in the New York area, to get stories on these guys. It changed a lot. I think some of it has to do with the specializations of the sport, not only like with younger athletes, which I'm against, but also with media. If you talk to somebody in 1978, they knew who Bill Rogers was, even if they never ran, because he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Yeah. Or when he won the marathon, it was in the Daily News, like with big pictures and an article in depth. Yeah. And we had a more, set society back then, where people every morning waited for the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
So, and for whatever reason, this generation, and it was a great show years ago called Why World of Sports, 4:30 on Saturday. Yeah. They put all the sports on there. That were not Major League Baseball, that were not NFL, that were not hockey, that were not basketball.
But superstar races, you got guys from all different sports competing against each other.
We had Jim Ryan here on Staten Island in 1991 for a big dinner, and a couple of football guys showed up. And I asked one of them, I said, "Why are you here?" He goes, "I watched Why World of Sports, man. It's Jim Ryan."
Yeah.
The sport performances transcended a lot of it with the other sports.
Well, we have the ridiculousness now of people online constantly saying, "Oh, this football player could win in this track," or DK Metcalf could. And it's like, and they're like, if they had the training, it's like, you think if they had the training doing this in high school, and people would have told them you could have been an Olympian. Like, I know it was Robert Griffin III's like hardest decision was to play football or continue on Olympic track hurdling. Right. Hindsight's 2020. Obviously, the man's a millionaire, but probably would have been better off running track. And
but money talks.
Oh, yeah.
The NFL, and sometimes even today you don't see longevity in some of the sports that make a lot of money either. Major League Baseball, I really don't believe the 300 pitcher wins, the 500 home run club are really in that much jeopardy of getting a lot of new members, because a lot of these people make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They get hurt, and it's not worth it for them to rehab to come back. They already got the money.
Especially pitchers, yeah.
Pitchers especially, and
they go 5 innings now.
They're all getting Tommy John.
Yeah, but if you study Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, Sandy Koufax, these guys ran like 2 to 3 miles.
Oh yeah,
a lot in their training, because if you see the way they pitch, they use their hips and their legs. Seaver was always known for having that dirty knee. Today the pitchers just whip it. And whipping leads to more trauma to the tendons, elbow, and shoulder. But like I said, but with the track stuff, the internet has been both good and not so good. And like I said, the major thing is, I remember going in 89, 90, let's say, the Track and Field Writers of New York luncheon, usually put together by Walt Murphy, another great sage of our sport, great writer, unbelievable statistics. And we went to the Carnegie Deli. There's about 40 of us there, Wow. Now you go to a meet, the numbers are really not there anymore.
Well, we had on Jonathan Galt of Let's Run. I know Jonathan Galt's had a lot of these meetings.
It was great.
He's very good. And then you have the guys for Sidious Mag and, Chavez, who does a great job. And we're trying to break into that space at some point, interviewing great people like yourself and eventually getting out there, hopefully to some meets and things like that. But yeah, I think there needs to be more. And I think it's kind of interesting because, I'm a New York sports fan. Dave is, I believe. It seems like you are as well. Right. Doesn't it kind of suck that Boston has kind of taken that mantle for indoor, right? You have BU, you have that beautiful track there. Staten Island's competing, but it's like right now Boston's winning, and I don't like it.
Yeah, well, that's if I know the story correctly, I believe it's the New Balance guy who put his own money into it, kind of like what Phil Knight did out in Eugene.
Yes.
And I've not been up there, but everyone I talk to is blown away by the facility. And the facility, if I'm correct, is in the city, right?
Yeah, it's not too far away from BU.
Yeah, so
Magic carpet over there.
Being in the city creates its own electricity exchange.
Yeah, right. Because even like the Armory is not like it's not in the.
It's up in Manhattan, yes. And I love Ocean Breeze, but we're on Staten Island out here. Yeah. So I think we got to contact one of these CEOs of the shoe companies and say, hey, put together.
That's the thing is it's money. We've been talking here, we're from New Jersey, and we had to have our state championship meet in Staten Island this year.
I know. I saw that.
Because we don't have anything here in the state.
Right, which, by the way, I'm very surprised, personally.
Me too.
I've run in the Toms River bubble. I've been to the Rutgers indoor facility, and
Rutgers is just 4 lanes, but it's like 300-something meters, And
you would figure that Jersey would have something based on the dynamics of the state.
The skill level of the state, we should have it because we're one of the most stacked states in all the country in terms of our depth.
And I know you guys pay a fair share of taxes. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
You're telling me. So we constantly talk here about how to grow this sport. And you've obviously been a person that's been a part of the growth process of the last 40 years. And your approach with positivity, I think, is a good one. If you had the ability right now, because Dave and I have also talked, and one of the things that people tend to forget is a lot of great runners, especially distance runners, are nerds. A lot of us are. And then a lot of them go on from being runners to being CEOs or successful. There's a lot of money in former track athletes that could be putting a lot back into our sport right now. If you had the reins and you had the ideas and they could be put to paper, what would you do in order to grow this sport so that we can get more casual fans involved?
Marketing. Promotion. Fred LeBeau was like a locomotive engine when he was in charge of the New York City Marathon. He was everywhere promoting that stuff, even like in April, even like in May, building it up. one thing as well, I do believe that sometimes the politicians have to involve themselves as well. Fred would go to the city council and give them all marathon shirts and marathon jackets, stuff like that. That doesn't happen much anymore from what I know, I
don't know if it's legal. If they can give it away, would it be considering gifts and things like that? I'm
not sure, but maybe the old T-shirt could fall under, a little bit of a cheaper thing. But it really is promotion, marketing. The other hat that I've worn for many years is that I'm a history teacher, and I do believe the dynamics of the country, to really go off on a tangent. When we started getting into this Common Core stuff in education, where, now as a subject area, you have to teach to an exam.
Yep.
The kids lose out on the inspiring stories that you could spend time with in a classroom, on people like Jim Thorpe, Wilma Rudolph, all these people. And, unless they see the movie 42, they have no clue who Jackie Robinson is, which is unbelievable, But that's how it's set up today. The appreciation of history has not been ingrained into the younger generation because of the focus on the test. Maybe that will change, but for now, that's what we have to deal with. But it's funny, what Seb Coe once told me, which is a really great thing. He's a young runner, and if you ever see photos of him, like when he's 11, he's a shrimp. All right, like you look at him, he's like the shortest guy on his team, and rail thin. And he was like, well, listen, even when he was 11, his father was like, well, in 1972, he goes, my goal is get my son on the podium in 1980. Like they had this long plan. But Seb was like, who else got there? And he was curious. And in the days before Amazon, he would order books by mail with a check, like where you buy Herb Elliott's book in Australia, where the book is $5, but the shipping is $100.
Yeah.
Back in that time period, right? And Seb read about Herb Elliott, Jim Ryan, all these people, that came before him. Obviously, having Bannister in England was a home run, But Seb, I always believe, was inspired by those who came before him. He knew the importance of making his mark, which I think quite a few athletes do, Carl Lewis as well. These guys were like, I want to make history. I want to be famous. Most of the time is because they studied the past. And, kids today, there's a camp I worked at for many years called the Running School in White Lake, New York. It's still there forever. It's run now by Bart Sesser and Sean Rice. And the one thing I always loved about that school, which goes back to when Al Burkowski, Paul Limmer ran it, was that during the summer, they put you in the cabins by ability, not by your team. So if you were an 8-minute miler, you were in cabin 10 with 8-minute milers. And what those kids learn, they learn from these other kids from these other programs, and maybe their coach wasn't exactly as psychotic as they thought. Wow, you do that? You do hill work? You do that? And I think the internet could be used for that on a really, really high level. The one thing that was really cool, by the way, at the Milrose Games this past year, they brought in the legendary jumper Bob Beeman.
Yep.
And they did acknowledge him, which I thought was great. And Bob's an old friend of ours as well. As I told you in the intro thing, we had Bob on Staten Island last November and stuff. And, a lot of these people do want to still be in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Maybe not because of ego, but because they do want to share to the future, what did I go through? And Bob Beeman went through a hell early life, with a guy who said he was his father, and then at 13 told him, I'm really not your father, and he wasn't his father. Kindergarten, he was suspended for punching a teacher, okay? He was really going down the wrong path, and track and field saved him. And, Bob, Craig Virgin, Bill Rogers, Joan Benoit, all of these legendary people, Frank Shorter, they want to pass on their stuff so that if they could help one kid get inspired, they could do it. One thing I'm involved in, the Jim Thorpe movement. Jim Thorpe got his medals restored to him in 1983, if you know that story, when they were denied. But it was never officially listed in the record books as the Olympic champion. The IOC was resistant on that. And thankfully, last year, it finally happened where he was put in the record books. Finally. And a lot of people had a lot to do with that. I was one of those cogs in a machine that helped with it, right? But if you ask kids today in school who Jim Thorpe is, they have no idea, And there is a Hollywood movie that's in the works. There's a few groups, I think, battling for control, so to speak. But something will happen with the movie with Jim Thorpe. I also felt that the movie on Jesse Owens 5 years ago, Race
was great.
Race woke up that generation because those kids don't learn who Jesse Owens is.
Yeah, it's crazy.
To that point, Jeff, quickly before, because I don't want to hold you for too long, but
no worries.
You were mentioned that being students of the sport, right? Like I know Dave's an encyclopedia for the sport. Like
that's great. That's
a lot
great.
more about that I do about running, and I did enjoy it. And I looked in the past too, right? Like I like to do that with the Prefontaine in that era, with Shorter and all that. Right. And and I still look, and I was a history major, so I do enjoy history as well. But it's like kids now. We talk about who do they look up to, Dave? We've heard this from everyone. They know every single collegiate athlete. Yeah, runs at the NCAA races.
Well, that's great.
They're not as interested in the pros. They're not as interested in those in the past. So was there something to be said about that? You talked about the short attention span, right? Is there something to be said about those who are looking at these guys and girls that they think are these big adults, really only 4 or 5 years older than them, and thinking that exactly what they're doing is exactly what I need to be doing? And like you said, not looking in the past, not looking at the former accomplishments, and appreciating the grind and the struggle that they had to go through. And like you said, only looking at that instant glory and instant success that we see online all the time.
Right. It's interesting. I saw it at the Milrose games after Abby Steiner competed. She was mobbed.
And she deserves it. Abby's fantastic.
Yeah, which is great. And she was great, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
I do agree with you. Besides the past, the current athletes have to be marketed better. And I really don't know whether it is the governing body, the shoe companies themselves. I mean, a lot of them are on Instagram and they do have a TikTok thing and all that, and that's great. But, the one thing, I can leave you off with this. We have a golden opportunity coming in 2028 with the LA
Absolutely.
Olympics. Okay? Yep. We could build up to that right now. And I do know from my heart that Seb Coe wants to see it. All the movers and shakers want to see it. They want to see track make the leap to that. Yep. One idea I brought up, it's actually not my idea, but it's from a former New Jersey guy who was involved with this too, Rich Kanah, right?
Rich Kanah was great.
Yeah, Rich Kanah, as you know, is down in Atlanta, right? And Lou Vasquez did this with Vin Lanana at Randall's. Before a world-class event, before a world-class track meet, have a 5K run.
Yeah,
great.
And
promote it.
Now, 5 years ago, there was a Tracktown USA meet at Randall's. There was a 5K run before it. 400 people signed up. It started on the track, ran through Randall's Island, finished on the track. Your race number was your ticket to go to the meet. Do you know how many runners were there who had never seen a track meet before in their life?
I know, it's crazy.
And to the credit of the announcer was great. He explained to the crowd what a 1,500 meters was.
And that's what everyone needs.
That's another issue. We really got to just run miles here.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was the night where Robbie Andrews ran his time qualification to make the world championships. So when he did it, the crowd understood and went crazy.
Which is wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's great.
And you had elite athletes walking around, meeting the crowd, everything, not those. And it wasn't just people who were competing. They made like Bernard Lagat and a few other these guys coaches.
And even teammates of these people that aren't competing. The teammates support all the time.
Right.
Which is what I think the new U.S. Track League is trying to do. The problem is, there's not enough track-only facilities in this country to hold big meets.
I know.
You have Hayward Field.
Like you mentioned before, it comes down to the money.
You have it indoor, but in terms of outdoor track, you have Hayward, you have Aichen Stadium, but they're nothing compared to what you have over in Europe.
And I've said repeatedly, if the UFC, if boxing, if PGA, if a lot of these sports, which don't have teams, have a lot of individuals, can get them together and market them properly, why can't the United States tell some of their athletes, hey, we're the United States track body. We will pay you $90,000 a year to run 5 of our meets. You have to run these meets.
Good question.
How many? What you're telling me? Who was it that we had? Who do we have on that said? Dave, we had someone on that said if you told even Sydney McLaughlin, I'll pay you $150,000 to run 6 of our meets. You have to, so we can promote you. They said every athlete, elite athlete.
Was it Mike Rutt?
It might have been Mike Rutt. Noah Lyles. and all of them would take it to not have to go to Europe, to still get their promotion money.
Oh, no, to be here and to perhaps be on a network.
Because we have to tell people, we have to be able to promote who's coming on a consistent basis.
Right. It can't be on the NBC, the Universal app. It has to be on broadcast TV because not everybody.
I agree with you. But once again, like I've been around the governing body here for years. Like I said, they have a golden opportunity going through to 2028 now.
Yeah.
Rich Kennard in May has that Atlanta, track meet going on, but he's also, I believe, having road miles for the public.
Which is great.
The public stays afterwards.
Yeah.
If Coach Bobby Kersey is listening, who I have great respect for, he's doing that LA meet, I think it's Memorial Day weekend, and he has some really good stuff going on there. He has some great music singers showing up. Nice. And they're going to have like a festival outside.
But you got to have city
if you put on a 5K
show up
at 9 a.m. in the morning, you might get a few hundred people going to say, "Oh, track meet's going on. Let's go." And it's got to like encompass the product.
Yeah.
The product has to be encompassed in a way, and I think it can be done. I will tell you, like I said, talking with Seb and talking with some people at the high levels of the sport, they absolutely want to do this. But I don't know who's slamming the door in their faces.
And the athletes have to compete. Like they have to show up at meets. Like I love Sydney McLaughlin. She's fit, but I think she ran 3 or 4 races last year.
Right.
Like
thing Mo decided not to run at the Milrose Games.
And then she didn't run after Worlds last year. She was done.
Right.
So like you need the people not only to run in this country, but to run and race against each other.
I agree. And, I also look at one athlete I totally admire, who's a great friend of mine. I'm very lucky to call him my friend, is Ajay Wilson. How Ajay Wilson is not marketed the way she is. She was on the cover of Frosted Flakes box about 7 years ago. But I have that autograph, by the way.
It's literally, her grade school is about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting.
Yeah. And, like I said, I mentioned to you guys in the writing, my running association here on Staten Island holds a dinner every year, the Wednesday before the New York City Marathon. The idea is that the athletes are in the city anyway. Some of them are here either to run the 5K or the marathon, or they're just being brought in by expo people or the shoe companies and stuff. And, we've had Ajay at the dinner, where, and we have every kid, high school and under, that comes to our dinner does not pay, thanks to the generosity of great sponsors for the seats. So we had over 100 kids, and I get to sit with Bob Beeman, Ajay Wilson, Bill Rogers, Eamon Coughlin. We bring them in. And, and what's really great with the athletes is that they also know we're grassroots. So we can't do 150,000, but we could do some kind of, money deal of sorts. It's at a very low level, but they're always great. And to get them around the kids, I think that's another thing, like to get the current stars with the legends around the kids at a high level would be really, really good. And Rod Dixon this year, it's the 40th anniversary of his 1983 New York City Marathon win, which some people consider one of the greatest comebacks in the marathon history. Rod was way back, caught Jeff Smith, the British runner, running his first marathon, by the way, at the 26-mile mark, and outkicked him to win. And crazy. Rod's amazing. He was a 3:30, 1500 meter man, 3:52, world record holder in the half marathon. Marathoner. At 40 years old, he ran the Milrose Mile on the wooden boards at Madison Square Garden and ran 4:01.
That's the
range. Shoes and Mondo, right? So, but anyway, Rod ran in Saucony, and Rod dedicated his whole career during that time with helping Saucony. Saucony started out, by the way, as a shoe company, like in the late 1800s, out by Reading, Pennsylvania. Okay, There's a river called Saucony. Okay, it's on Route 222. And eventually in the late 70s, they went into running shoes, but they'd Arthur Lydiard with Rod, and they designed for Rod the Dixon Trainer. And then they had his racing shoe. So I'm happy to tell you that Saucony this year is going forward with huge anniversary stuff in honor of Rod. They're re-releasing a Dixon Trainer, although it's a retro lifestyle shoe. I would not recommend you running it, but they're going to be doing things with him. And like I said, you could market the past, but bring in the present as well.
Absolutely.
And if you could do all that, it could be really, really great. I mean, I love to get other athletes to Staten Island, and we're always like talking and seeing what we could do. We find, though, that some of the younger ones sometimes are bound by their agent.
Yeah,
so
I know.
That could be a little bit of a hurdle.
Yep.
And whereas, believe it or not, the older ones are kind of like, they don't get the demand that they used to.
Well, yeah, a lot of our guests.
Not every road race anymore where he gets paid to show up.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our guests, are people who are retired. Like we had on Johnny Gray.
Johnny Gray, yeah. Look at Johnny Gray. How great was he? Oh. And you guys are going to laugh, but about 6 years ago, I saw him hanging out in the Armory coaching his team.
Yep.
I'm like, Johnny, I said, you got to come downstairs. George Hirsch from Runner's World is here. Everybody's here. I brought him down and they all lit up like, oh, wow. You're here. And there he is just quietly.
Such a nice guy.
I was like in awe because he was one of my favorite runners. I'm like, we have Johnny Gray on my podcast. And he was telling us how he started running as a junior. He ran 2:17. And by the end of his senior year, he was like a 148. I'm like, what? You improved 20 seconds.
I always felt that one of the greatest individual performances I ever saw was 92 at the trials in New Orleans. He took it out from start to finish and ran like 142.9.
That was his style,
like 49 seconds. Yeah, the Johnny Gray Twilight Zone. After that 400, that was usually under 50.
Well, it was funny because we had him, and then we also had on Divas Robinson, who was trained by Johnny, and they had very similar running styles.
Right. And another guy like walks around, coaches, younger crowd doesn't know him, Marcus O'Sullivan, Villanova.
Oh, yeah. Ridiculous. They don't know.
Also, Vicky Radowski, who coaches a high school team. She's up in the Armory and, at Ocean Breeze quite a bit.
Yeah. Now that there's so many people out there, but, I did like this winter, how New Balance brought Sidney McLaughlin to the high school nationals.
Smart move. And not only
like that,
they brought Emma Coburn. They brought a few other people. I know Mark Coogan's crew was all there, except for Ellie Thierry, who just gave birth. That's what they got to do. I know the Nike meet at the Armory had Craig Engels.
Yep.
And maybe a couple of other people, but I'm not sure. But I think that's got to be marketed more.
Absolutely.
It needs to be marketed more, and I think they also need to take advantage. Some of the SIDs at the colleges need to let some of these elite college kids come back down to some of these national meets because a lot of these high school kids know who they are. But Jeff, we could talk forever. Unfortunately, I do have to close this out.
No worries.
Jeff, this was a fantastic show. Dave, anything before we jump out of here?
No, I mean, just the absolute knowledge that we just heard, and you could tell his enthusiasm and love for the sport. It's what I have. It's what you have, and I'm in awe of all these amazing legends that you just spit out off the top of your head. Like, oh yeah, Bill Rogers. It's truly fascinating. It's amazing. What a wonderful life in this sport you have lived. And
no, thank you. And there were a lot of people out there, starting with my father, who got me. And my father was not a runner, but always brought me this stuff. And I've always been grateful for the friendships that I've made in the sport. I'm very blessed, without a doubt. And I'm trying my best to pass it on for others so that, they get the same enjoyment that the three of us get out of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a great sport. And hopefully, like I said, LA 2028 could be a pinnacle moment for the sport. Crossing fingers.
Let's hope.
So once again, he's Jeff Benjamin. He is one of the most prolific American track riders of the last 4 decades, senior writer for RunBlogRun, a litany of accolades. He is intertwined in especially Staten Island track and field cross country, but national track and field cross country. Jeff, anything you want to promote? You talked about your website, RunBlogRun. Anything else, if you want to talk a little more about those real quick to promote it out there, get people to go.
Sure. 3 things really quick. As I mentioned before, my publisher, Larry Eder, on Facebook, every morning does a half-hour soliloquy known as Coffee with Larry. So if you go on Facebook, try to look up Coffee with Larry, you can hear Larry. Larry is a legend as well. He's been around the block or around the oval as well. As I mentioned, I have a new website, Jeff Benjamin's Running World. I do a trivia contest. Somebody wins a free pair of ASICS shoes in a lottery with the correct answers. So, recently the great announcer from the Milrose games, Ian Brooks, won a pair.
Nice.
For the trivia question, which is pretty cool. And Staten Island Running Association, we're a nonprofit grassroots. We promote the sport. We really try to work with the youth. During COVID, thanks to donations, we gave laptops out to kids in need.
Nice.
Like I said, our big gala dinner the Wednesday before the New York City Marathon. If you're in the neighborhood, You want to come, you will not be disappointed. And some people show up spur of the moment, last minute. You're like, wow, this guy's here, or this girl's here. So you never know who comes, but we always get a ton of people. So, and one other thing, please follow my friend Rod Dixon, 40th anniversary, 1983 New York City Marathon. Saucony is going huge on Rod this year. So.
Awesome, Jeff. It was awesome having you on. I had a blast. I always love, people that love the sport, that have a knowledge of the sport, that's been involved. It's just great hearing all the names that you drop, like Dave said, all the legends. And yeah, it's, we're envious, and hopefully 20 years down the road, we're still doing this show. And we
you guys
some of the people. Yeah. We can be some of the people. Yeah.
You guys will get there.
That's where we want to be. So once again, this is Talking in Ovals. If you like what you heard, like, share, follow, subscribe, rate us 5 stars. Spread this word of mouth. Go find us on the socials, and we will be back next week, everyone. So long, all.